Today, hotter and more extreme. A new report urges action as Australia's climate becomes more unpredictable. More than 90 people killed and dozens more missing after flash flooding in southern Spain. Kamala Harris tries to distance herself from comments made by Joe Biden about Donald Trump supporters. And a relentless defence sees the Diamonds secure a commanding win over the Silver Ferns. Hello, I'm Ruby Cornish. This is ABC News Mornings, coming to you from the land of the Gadigal people. A new report has confirmed that Australia is hotter and climate impacts are getting more extreme. The CSIRO and the Bureau of Meteorology state the State of the Climate report, released every 2 years, shows that for the first time, average local temperatures have risen by more than 1.5 degrees since 1910. Reporter Miles Holbrook-Walk joins us live now from Sydney. G'day, Miles. Take us through the details of this report.
Yes, Ruby, well, this is the 8th State of the Climate report, and in many ways it tells us something we already know, that indeed Australia and the planet is getting warmer. The specific figures showed today that Australia is 1.51 degrees warmer than it was since 1910, when records began, and that's derived from data drawn from not only climate models and weather readings historically, but also looking at trends across the globe too. What's also interesting is that sea temperatures in Australian waters are up 1.08 degrees. What these numbers mean in a material sense is that they're impacting severe weather events, and that severe weather events are becoming more common. This means longer fire seasons with more days of extreme heat, and they're exacerbated by human-caused climate change. As a result of all of this, there's been stark warnings from the co-authors of the report, the CSIRO, of what Australians may come to expect in the future.
We need to make a decision. So we must stabilise the climate, and that means getting to net zero. When we get to net zero, it decides how warm it's going to be. We're in charge of making that decision, and we need to take that very seriously. We're looking at bushfires, heat waves, intense rainfall. That's going to continue into the future but become more extreme. And something that really worries me is if you increase the intensity and frequency, they'll be happening closer together. So are we resilient enough to have a bushfire followed by a flood? How are we going to plan for that?
And so that's the CSIRO speaking about, I suppose, what tools are at Australia's disposal in terms of the urgency of needing to get to net zero. But Ruby, this is really something that's beyond just Australia's action too. There needs to be action on a global scale, and that's been articulated in this report as well, as that the global outlook is getting worse. Indeed, it's worth noting, because of the rise in greenhouse gas emissions, many of those emissions have kind of baked in our trajectory until about 2040. It's from there that we can start to produce change and reduce the severity and exacerbation of these severe weather events, as well as their prevalence. Ruby?
Miles Holbrook-Walk in Sydney, thank you. More than 90 people have been killed in flash flooding in Spain's southeast as rescue crews scour towns across the region for survivors. The Spanish Prime Minister says dozens of towns have been flooded, and he's warning the danger is not over yet. Europe correspondent Catherine Diss is in Barcelona and filed this report.
From the air, rescue crews scour a sea of mud for signs of life. This woman and her dog winched to safety just in time as floodwaters rapidly rise. Some clamber to rooftops to escape the torrent, hoping they'll be spotted. Cars and trucks no match for the wall of water. More than 400 millimetres of rain fell on parts of southeastern Spain in just a few hours on Tuesday, turning streets into gushing rivers. Large swathes of the region remain underwater. In darkness, rescuers started the hunt by boat and car. Some are lucky enough to walk away unscathed. Others had to be stretchered to safety. But the sheer scale of the disaster wouldn't become clear until morning.
Jamás en la historia Never before in history has there been so much rain. You can't even imagine the amount of rain that fell here yesterday.
It's a catastrophe. The floods we had in 1982 were a joke compared to what happened here yesterday.
The government has declared 3 days of mourning and warned the natural disaster isn't over yet.
The whole of Spain is crying with all of you. Our absolute priority is to help you. We ask citizens not to let their guard down. We cannot yet consider this devastating episode to be over.
But amid the heartbreak, tales of human survival are emerging. This elderly couple in their late 80s were remarkably found unhurt in the rubble. Such stories will boost morale in a region with tested resolve. But with many now questioning if the warnings came too late, grief and hope could quickly turn to anger. Catherine Diss, ABC News, Spain.
Former US President Donald Trump has seized on controversial comments from Joe Biden less than a week out from Election Day. US Vice President Kamala Harris has sought to distance herself from the controversial comments. North America Bureau Chief Jade McMillan has more from Pennsylvania.
Kamala Harris's rally here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania has just wrapped up. It's one of several campaign stops that the Vice President is making today as both she and Donald Trump try to get to as many communities in as many swing states as they can in the final days of the campaign. But the Vice President has also tried today to put some distance between herself and these comments made by Joe Biden. He was responding to a joke that was made by a comedian at a Donald Trump rally earlier this week. That joke described the US territory of Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. It attracted a lot of criticism in the days afterwards, and Democrats really seized on it as they try to reach Latino voters in a number of these states where the election is likely to be decided, including here in Pennsylvania, where there is a significant proportion of the population that has Puerto Rican heritage. But when Joe Biden was speaking about this incident, he appeared to describe Donald Trump's supporters as garbage, using that same language.
Just the other day, a speaker at his rally called Puerto Rico a floating island of garbage. Well, let me tell you something. I don't know the Puerto Rican that I know, or Puerto Rico where I'm in my home state of Delaware. They're good, decent, honorable people. The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
Now, he argues that's not what he meant, that what he was trying to say was that the hateful rhetoric, in his words, of the comedian was garbage rather than Donald Trump's supporters. But Kamala Harris certainly trying to sort of clean this up this morning, local time, when she spoke to reporters.
First of all, he clarified his comments, but let me be clear, I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. You heard my speech last night and continuously throughout my career. I believe that the work that I do is about representing all the people, whether they support me or not.
Now, Donald Trump, as you'd expect, wasn't convinced by that or by Joe Biden's explanation. He very quickly compared these remarks to the now infamous comments made by Hillary Clinton back in 2016 when she said that some of Donald Trump's supporters were a basket of deplorables. And he had this message for his backers when he spoke in North Carolina.
He called them garbage. And they mean it, even though without question my supporters are far higher quality than Crooked Joe or Lion Kamala. My response to Joe and Kamala is very simple. You can't lead America if you don't love Americans.
Now, those comments by Joe Biden were made around the same time that Kamala Harris was delivering a major speech in Washington, D.C., not far from the White House, in which she was really trying to present herself to voters as the candidate who would do more to unite Americans. She argues that Donald Trump would divide them. So whether or not Joe Biden meant what he said or the way it came across, whether or not this ends up having a meaningful impact on the campaign, it certainly doesn't help Kamala Harris as she tries to sell that message.
And Global Affairs editor John Lyons joins us now from our Washington bureau. Hi, John. Thank you for your time. We've seen Kamala Harris forced into damage control mode, saying that she strongly disagrees with anyone, criticising anyone based on how they vote. How damaging is this incident for her campaign?
Well, Ruby, I don't think it's a particular sort of game changer in terms of too many votes. It's a distraction for her, probably for 24 hours or so. It takes the oxygen out of what she wants to stress. What she's trying to stress, she gave a big rally here in Washington yesterday, and there's a distinct change in emphasis in her speeches now. She's very much now hammering what she argues are her economic credentials, because the polls tend to show that both her and Donald Trump are deadlocked about 50-50. It's a very tight race, but some of those polls also show that the majority of voters believe that Donald Trump is probably better placed to manage the economy. So now in these final frantic days of the campaign, Kamala Harris is trying to reassert what she argues are her economic credentials.
These comments about the garbage that we heard just there are comparisons being made with the 2016 campaign when Hillary Clinton described Trump supporters as a, quote, basket of deplorables. Can you just remind us of what happened there?
Well, that's right. It was one of Hillary Clinton's big missteps in 2016. And it plays into the narrative by the Republicans that the Democrats are very much sort of Washington-based establishment people who are the elites of this country, who see themselves as superior to Republicans or to middle Americans. It was damaging for Hillary Clinton. This doesn't help. However, the initial comment that Puerto Rico was a floating island of garbage was by a comedian at a Donald Trump rally. So Donald Trump has distanced himself from that, saying, I didn't say those things. That was in fact from a comedian I've never met. And likewise, Kamala Harris is saying, I don't agree with those comments by Joe Biden. Now, it takes quite a while to work out exactly what Joe Biden was saying. He's no longer a very articulate politician, and it was difficult to even work out what he was saying. But when you look at it carefully, he was saying that the only garbage I see floating out there is his, Donald Trump, supporters. And now Kamala Harris is saying, not true, I don't regard fellow Americans as garbage. So it doesn't help the Democrats. And in some ways, however, it allows her, she needed to try to distance herself from Joe Biden's administration, and she's now trying to distance herself from Joe Biden's comments.
John, we are less than a week out now from the election. Both candidates are in Wisconsin. Why Wisconsin? Why is that important?
Well, Ruby, those swing states, there's 6 or 7 of them, are going to decide this election. As I said, the polls tend to be here very close, gridlocked at about 50-50. There are, at the moment, new polls that have come out suggesting that in Pennsylvania, which is a key state, which delivers up to 19 electoral votes next week, that is still deadlocked. However, according to the latest CNN poll, it's suggesting that Michigan and Wisconsin, another 2 key seats, that Kamala Harris has edged ahead in those seats. So that will certainly give heart to the Democrats. But the bottom line is, Ruby, nobody here knows the result of this election. There are too many variables. The effect of the Gaza war on the Arab American vote here as well could swing things against the Democrats. There are too many unknowns. And so we won't know the result of this election until next Tuesday here in Washington.
And many voters yet to cast their vote, but we do have 57.5 million ballots already cast. I mean, you've called this the most consequential election of our times. Is this number of votes that have already been cast, does this indicate that Americans are also taking this election very seriously?
Well, Ruby, this is a deeply polarised country, and everybody you talk to, wherever you go, you'll hear people waiting to cross the street, or in a cafe you'll hear people talking about, mentioning Trump or Harris. It has certainly energised this country. It's such a stark choice between the Donald Trump way and the Kamala Harris way. The Donald Trump way essentially says this country is going to rack and ruin, the enemy within is taking over, they are loaded with guns, he's often talking about gangs from Venezuela and other places, and you are losing your country, and to get it back you have to vote for me, versus Kamala Harris, who is saying that the old established institutions of this country, the Department of Justice, the FBI and so forth, and the White House and the government will help us through these difficult times. It's such a stark choice in direction, and I think it's incredible that this country is still deadlocked at 50-50. Really, it's going to come right down to the wire.
Nail-biting stuff. Global Affairs editor John Lyons, thank you. And we will, of course, have full coverage of the US election right here on the ABC News channel. You can join us for the count from 10 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday, the 6th of November. Well, additional services are being brought in to support a school community in Melbourne mourning the death of one of its students in a crash on Tuesday. 11-year-old Jack Davey died after a car crashed into a fence at Auburn South Primary School, hitting the table he was sitting at, killing him and injuring 4 other students. Reporter Nicholas Hines joins us now from Melbourne. Nick, how is the community faring there?
Well, Ruby, we've actually just had an update that's come through just minutes ago from Monash Health, where 2 of the 4 injured students were taken and they've now been discharged, which is some good news out of what is such a serious tragedy in Hawthorn East on Tuesday afternoon when Jack Davey lost his life and those 4 other students were injured. 2 of them taken to Monash Health hospitals with injuries, and 2 others taken to Royal Children's Hospital, where they remain in a stable condition, is the most recent update, but 2 others just discharged, which is some good news. But yeah, additional services being sent into the community today. We saw yesterday such an outpouring of grief and support. Dozens of extra teachers, counsellors and chaplain services sent to the school from neighbouring schools in the area. Many of those services in place today, and now also a broader community support hub has been set up at the nearby Anderson Park, being run by the local council and the Red Cross for anyone in the area who does feel like they need support. And we're just seeing from the scene yesterday all of those floral tributes. We saw balls with messages written on them as well in memory of Jack Davey, who was a keen sports person. The local futsal teams and Aussie Rules football teams coming out and talking about what a great team player he was, representing Victoria at the national level in futsal as well. So very much grief continuing in the community today, but a community really banding together as well. The 40-year-old woman who was the driver of the car that did plough through that fence was arrested but then released pending further inquiries. Police say at this stage there's no further update on that investigation, but it is ongoing.
Nicholas Hines in Melbourne, thank you. And just repeating that breaking news that 2 of the 4 children who were taken to hospital have now been discharged, and 2 children remain in hospital in a stable condition. In other news, a fire has broken out at a shipyard that builds the UK's nuclear submarines in northwest England. Police say there is no nuclear risk at the BAE Systems yard in Barrow-in-Furness. Michelle Rimmer reports from London.
Investigators are still trying to determine the cause of the blaze, which is believed to have broken out at just after midnight on Wednesday. We know that 2 people have been treated for smoke inhalation. However, no other injuries have been reported. Now, the fire, which is said to have been massive, broke out at a shipyard in England's north in the town of Barrow-in-Furness, and that shipyard is run by BAE Systems. It's where the future AUKUS submarine fleet is currently being built. Now, that submarine fleet is, of course, as part of a deal between the United States, the United Kingdom and Australia. It's a $380 billion deal for Australia, and there's been some concerns about whether this blaze could potentially impact the rollout of that nuclear-powered submarine deal. Now, we haven't heard any information from official sources regarding the impact of the blaze and any potential damage to any ships that were under construction or any future construction. We haven't heard anything from BAE Systems Systems, the shipyard and the manufacturer. Haven't heard anything confirming the impact or the damage by the UK government or the Australian government. However, we did speak to Katie Gallagher a little earlier, and here is what she had to say.
We haven't had any advice that there's any concerns around AUKUS or deliverability of that, but obviously it's early days and there's good communication, it's a strong partnership and we'll continue to work with them.
The AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine deal is a very important deal for all three countries involved, so any concerns about delays to this project will of course come as a concern and a worry to all three countries involved. Unfortunately, this shipyard is, there's a lot of secrecy around it because it is a defence site, and so it's difficult to know exactly what goes on inside when we visit on press trips. We can't actually access the shipbuilding site and those halls ourselves, so there is a chance that we won't be finding out any real information regarding the full impacts of this fire for some time yet.
Michelle Rimmer there. Lebanese health officials say Israeli strikes have killed 19 people, including 8 women, across 2 towns in Lebanon's Baalbek region. Earlier, Israel told more than 100,000 people to leave as it expands airstrikes against alleged Hezbollah targets. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran has more from Jerusalem.
The warnings in Baalbek came thick and fast. Calls to mobile phones with pre-recorded messages from Israeli troops, followed up by the local fire brigade driving up and down residential streets with loudhailers telling people to flee. This video from the IDF's Arabic spokesman showing just how large the evacuation area is. It's the first time an Israeli evacuation order has been issued for an entire city in Lebanon since this conflict began. Baalbek, a World Heritage listed site, has 3,000-year-old ancient ruins now potentially in the firing line. Around 4 hours later, the bombardment began. And not only are there around 100,000 people living in Baalbek who have now fled, more than 10,000 people had fled to the city from southern Lebanon throughout the course of this conflict. These latest strikes following attacks elsewhere in the Bekaa Valley in recent days, which have killed dozens. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's new leader, Naim Qassem, has made his first address since taking the reins of the group earlier this week. He's promising to continue Hezbollah's war with Israel under the plan set out by his predecessor, Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed in an Israeli strike in late September. But he is leaving the door open to a ceasefire with Israel if certain conditions can be met.
We will continue to confront the aggression. If the Israelis decide to stop the aggression, we say that we accept, but with the conditions that we see as suitable and sufficient. We will not beg for a ceasefire. We will continue. We will not wait, no matter how long it takes.
The IDF claiming it killed dozens of Hezbollah militants in recent strikes across Lebanon, including a senior commander of its Special Operations Radwan force. This is all set against a backdrop of renewed negotiations, renewed efforts to try to convince Israel and Hezbollah to agree to a ceasefire. The proposal as it sits at the moment appears to be for a 2-month ceasefire, while the broader details, the finer details of a longer truce are sorted out, in line with previous UN resolutions. Israeli media is reporting that Israel would only be prepared to agree to such a deal if it was still able to launch strikes into Lebanon when it felt threatened. You'd have to say it's very unlikely Lebanon and Hezbollah will ever agree to that.
Matthew Doran there. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak is facing 25 new corruption charges over the multi-billion-dollar 1MDB scandal. After taking power in 2009, the former leader set up the State Investment Fund to promote economic development, but it amassed billions in debt. Investigators allege more than $6.8 billion was stolen from the fund and laundered by Mr Najib's associates to finance Hollywood films and extravagant purchases. Malaysia's High Court has ordered the imprisoned former leader to enter a defence in his second corruption trial. Coastal regions of Taiwan and China are on high alert ahead of the arrival of Typhoon Kong-Ray. The storm had strengthened to a super typhoon with winds of up to 250 kilometres an hour, but has since been downgraded. It comes a week after the region was battered by a typhoon that left at least 160 dead in the Philippines. Kong-Ray is expected to make landfall in the next 24 hours. Rising premiums and grievances about how insurance claims are being handled are driving a surge in complaints against RACQ, one of Queensland's biggest insurers. Customers have told the ABC quotes for home cover have doubled or even tripled, and they can't get clear reasons why.
It's an insurer that's weathered decades of storms and floods, but it's confronting new trouble of its own making. Gold Coast homeowner John Monks says his canal-side property has never flooded, but the insurer more than doubled his premium last year.
Horrendous. It was a 110% increase.
He negotiated it down, but plans to take his business elsewhere. He's one of more than 35,000 Queenslanders making complaints about the insurer in the year to June. Complaints to RACQ have almost doubled since 2022. It was also slow to respond to more than 20% of complaints to the Ombudsman.
If you're not meeting deadlines with the Ombudsman, you've got problems with your processes and procedures. That is like kindergarten stuff that needs to be addressed.
The pressure's been building for some time. The federal financial regulator criticised RACQ's risk processes in 2022, pointing to an immature risk culture. Chief Executive David Carter insists the company is addressing the issues.
We changed our processes, added in resources, and we've seen some material improvement in that.
The whole industry is lifting premiums amid floods, storms and inflationary pressures. But RACQ has also introduced new risk modelling, and that's putting an extra spike on some home prices. RACQ says most households' premiums were largely unchanged, but 12% of properties it insured were considered high risk for floods and storms, triggering higher insurance prices.
We are spreading out the increase over several years for some of particularly the extreme risks.
Summer will be a test of the insurer's new risk profile and how many customers are willing to weather its premium increases. Liam Walsh, ABC News, Brisbane.
It's time to check the weather now with Nate Byrne. Nate, we are looking at some increased fire danger today, but also the potential for severe storms. What is going on?
It's this time of year, Ruby, you know, when it rains, it pours, so to speak, weather-wise. There's always several things for me to keep an eye on. At the moment, the satellite picture's been a bit of a mess, and that gives you a bit of an indication about what's going on. We've had troughs triggering some storms, bit more action up in the top of the country at the moment. But we've also got a frontal system moving through the southeast. Now, it's not a particularly strong one. There is a prefrontal trough that's licking up the east coast right now. That's going to help trigger some of this stormy weather you're talking about there. But heat across the nation is up, particularly in the northwest of the country. But because we've got warm conditions pretty much across the nation, except in the southeast, the fire danger is increased too. Now, that heat over in WA, we're going to keep an eye on that because it's increasingly starting to creep across into the east. In fact, we're going to see some low-level intensity heat waves starting to develop over the next couple of days for central and eastern interior parts of Australia. Today, fire danger, though, high fire danger conditions on both sides of the country. So WA certainly dealing with it. The trough there is drawing that heat right down into the southwest corner. But for large parts of Queensland, northern New South Wales, and then also northwestern Victoria and South Australia as well, some warm air there with pretty gusty winds mean high fire danger for those states too. Now, it's not the only thing. The storms was the other thing you're interested in. So let's have a look at the potential. We've got two separate areas that I'm really watching. So in the north around the south of the Gulf of Carpentaria, and then for the east coast too, southeastern Queensland and into New South Wales, likely to see thunderstorms, but severe cells, particularly around the border ranges in Queensland, are concerned today. Probably not huge falls by any means on the rainfall. You can't really see that much picking up in the east, but still there's a risk. Up north though, very different story. Some very welcome relief from the build-up, Ruby. I don't know how much time you've spent up in the tropics during this time of year, but it's pretty gross, and an afternoon shower and storm can definitely make things a lot more manageable.
Yeah, I do try and avoid the tropics around this time of year, Nate. So through this outlook, what's your focus? Where are you keeping an eye on?
Well, we'll see a little bit more of this action, certainly up in the tropics, at least for the next couple of days, and a little bit of wet weather here and there. But the focus isn't really on the falls, except for this system here. Not bringing much rain by any means. We'll see some wet weather out of it. In fact, let's look at the totals over the week ahead, because we'll see there's the tropics going off. bit more wet weather for parts of the east coast here and there, and then you can see not much of a signal as that secondary front comes through, but it's what it does with the heat that's really got my focus, because we've got all that warm air that's been pooling in the northwest for quite some time now. Well, this front might not carry enough moisture to do much damage, but it is going to be quite windy, and it will help draw that heat across the nation. So you can see there, especially through the weekend into the southeast, we're seeing temperatures pushing towards 30 for many. And as we get into early parts of next week, we're going to be keeping an eye on Queensland in particular, Ruby, because that heat is likely to pool and linger through the interior. Yeah, it's that time of year. Fire dangers are up, and they're only going to increase more as we get towards summer. But it looks like fire danger is likely to be a focus for me over the week ahead.
OK, and Nate, take us around the states.
All right, for today, let's get into it. Queensland, get ready, because you got that stormy weather up in the north, maybe severe cells there around the Gulf of Carpentaria, and then in the southeast. As I said, the border range is the focus, but it's central to southeastern parts. Anywhere could see some thunderstorm activity, maybe even in Brisbane. But the forecast at the moment is just a possible shower. It's getting to 31 degrees. We're not ruling out a chance of lightning later. Now, that stormy weather is getting into the interior of New South Wales in the north and central parts, and then wet weather for the coast. Now, for the most part, central and southern parts of the coast are only going to see showers, but there's a chance of some lightning here and there. Certainly falls increasing for Sydney. 25 will be the top for you. It's getting to 25 in Canberra as well, but the nation's capital should stay dry. In Victoria, pretty isolated falls in the south. There is a risk of some afternoon storms for the eastern ranges. It's getting to 19 in Melbourne. Just a couple of showers for you. It should mostly ease as we get towards this evening. For Tassie, though, wet weather developing across the state this morning. Now, that will back off, just sticking around in the west, the far south and for the northeast as we get towards this evening. And just as that happens, we're going to see snow down to about 900 metres. For Hobart, your showers will back off. You're getting to 15 today, so a good bit cooler than it has been. In South Australia, we've got some showers, mostly for the southern coasts, but also around the northern agricultural area. We'll see some developing through the day. Oh, and you might cop a storm in the far northwest too. For Adelaide, it's a fine 25 degrees. You can see the windy conditions there that are helping to pick up the fire danger. Over in WA, some showers are drying up first thing along the southern coast. Otherwise, just some storms through the southern interior to keep an eye on today. Things certainly warming up for Perth, getting to 33 there. It's staying fine. Then up north, some storms for the interior, sort of central and northern parts of the Kimberley. And then in the Territory, we could see storms anywhere north of Tennant Creek, but most of the action north of Elliot. But that does include Darwin today. Ruby, some nice relief from the build-up with a couple of showers and a storm, top of 33.
Love your work. Thanks, Nate. You're watching ABC News. Here are our top stories. The latest State of the Climate report shows Australia is hotter and climate impacts are getting more extreme. It found 9 of the warmest years on record for Australia have occurred since 2013, leading to longer fire seasons across the country. The report also found heavy rainfall events are becoming more intense. Rescue efforts are continuing in southern Spain with more than 90 people killed in flash flooding. Dozens more are still missing after heavy rain inundated towns through the eastern province of Valencia. Bridges and buildings have been destroyed and residents have been forced to climb to higher ground. Authorities fear the death toll will continue to climb. Kamala Harris is distancing herself from Joe Biden's remarks about Trump supporters. President Biden says he was responding to a controversial joke at a Republican rally earlier this week when he appeared to label Trump supporters garbage. The president insists he was only talking about the rhetoric of the comedian who made the joke, something Kamala Harris has echoed. And Australia has beaten New Zealand 63-50 in the final match of netball's Constellation Cup. New Zealand won the series 3-1, but the Diamonds avoided a clean sweep. Kira Austin was named player of the match, scoring 27 of her 30 shots on goal. The US President Joe Biden has sought to clarify remarks that have been interpreted as an attack on Donald Trump's supporters, comments that could upend the election in the final week of the campaign.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters. His demonization is seen as unconscionable.
Mr. Biden was responding to a joke made by a comedian at a Trump rally in New York that described Puerto Rico as a floating island of garbage. The president says his comments were referring to the hateful rhetoric spewed by Mr. Trump's supporter at the Madison Square Garden event. The Republican candidate has attacked the president at a rally in North Carolina.
Joe Biden finally said what he and Kamala really think of our supporters. He called them garbage. And they mean it, even though without question my supporters are far higher quality than Crooked Joe or Lying Kamala.
The latest controversy harks back to the 2016 election campaign when then Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton made this remark about Donald Trump's supporters.
You know, to just be grossly generalistic, you could put half of Trump's supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
It will be the downfall of their campaign that they continue to pull out Hillary Clinton comments like this. Hillary Clinton tactics don't work in America.
Well, I believe everything basically that President Biden says is garbage himself, as well as Kamala Harris, and I mean that with a straight face.
Kamala Harris sought to downplay Mr Biden's gaffe at a rally in North Carolina as she continued her blitz of critical swing states.
I strongly disagree with any criticism of people based on who they vote for. You heard my speech last night and continuously throughout my career. I believe that the work that I do is about representing all the people, whether they support me or not. And as President of the United States, I will be a president for all Americans, whether you vote for me or not.
With less than a week to go, the race remains evenly tied in the 7 key battleground states. Officials in Pennsylvania are preparing voting machines to be sent to local precincts. Mail-in ballots are being stored in a secure location before they're counted on election day. A judge in the swing states has extended a mail ballot deadline in one county after the Trump campaign complained some supporters were improperly turned away. Elsewhere, election workers in the competitive state of Georgia are bracing for potential violence, conspiracy theories and challenges to the result.
I have no control over human behavior, but what I do and what I will make sure, and what I have made sure since 2018, that I will hold both parties accountable to you, the voters of Georgia. And I stand ready to defend the results of the election with election officials all across the states. We will do our job.
Well, this latest controversy shows how much race has featured in this election campaign. Dr. Natasha Sharma is a professor of Asian American Studies and Black Studies at Northwestern University, and she joins us now from Chicago. Dr. Sharma, thank you for speaking to us.
My pleasure. I'm excited to be here.
Kamala Harris is known as the first black woman to be elected vice president, but it's also true that her mother emigrated from India and her father from Jamaica, and she's far less known as an Indian American or an Asian American. Why is that?
A lot of that has to do with the history of the one-drop rule and, you know, the foundations of U.S. race relations as really being a binary of black and white. And so because of this history in the United States where the law was if you are part black, then you are deemed black, that's really accounting for why people tend to view her as a black woman. At the same time, I think it's because, you know, she does not have a white parent like Obama did, that people often kind of invisibilize her Asian background. It's really an allegory of race in the United States, whereby there's so much attention to the blackness of a person, and there's really invisibility when it comes to the Asian Americanness.
And multiracial Americans are one of the fastest growing demographics in the United States. How significant is it for those voters to have a candidate like Kamala Harris running for office?
I think what we're seeing is really an interesting kind of shift in the focus on race. On the one hand, exactly as you're saying, you know, what does a candidate's background, what does their ancestry have to do with how voters are going to vote? On the one hand, her background is incredibly important for multiracial people who are 10% of the U.S. population, for South Asian Americans, and for Black Americans, and for women as a whole. However, what we're seeing more recently is actually a shift from the focus on Kamala Harris's background to a real analysis of race and racism. And so she's really highlighting how it's not race equals not being white. It's really the whiteness of the U.S. presidency and the kinds of racist rhetoric that we're actually hearing ramping up in just the last few days.
And America has, of course, already had an African-American president, Barack Obama, the first in U.S. history. To what extent do you think he has paved the way for someone like Kamala Harris, breaking this legacy of whiteness, as you call it?
Yes. I mean, in some ways, whoever occupies this position is going to be the head of the U.S. military. In some ways kind of advances the imperialism of the U.S. nation as a white nation. But on the other hand, I think Obama, in terms of who he was, right, his parents were a Kenyan and a white American, he has paved the way, I believe, for Kamala Harris. They have a lot of parallels. In one significant way, Obama really has taught the United States audience as well as the global audience to be more racially literate with regard to people who have more than one ancestry and who identify as multiracial. So in that way, we know from Obama, okay, that people are not just one racial identity. And we see with Kamala Harris that people are grappling and understanding the fact that she has parents of two different racial ancestries. At the same time, they share a lot in common and with former presidents in terms of not their identities, but their policies.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of grappling with this concept, Donald Trump made comments about Kamala Harris's ethnicity during the campaign. Notably, he made that comment, I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black, so I don't know, is she Indian or is she black? I mean, what kind of impact does that rhetoric have?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. Thank you for bringing that up. I mean, that was very tricky, and I think many people interpreted that in many different ways. One thing I will say is he was speaking to Black journalists there, and I think he was trying to really draw upon stereotypes of multiracial people as having divided loyalties, as not having a core identity because of the fact that they don't identify with just one racial background. And so he was really drawing upon the desire to stoke a sense of suspicion and skepticism about Kamala Harris's commitment to Black communities, when in fact we know that Black communities in the United States are very open to multiracial community members within their groups.
Dr. Natasha Sharma, Professor of Asian American Studies and Black Studies at Northwestern University, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Patricia Karvelis joins us now to talk federal politics. Hi, PK. More revelations overnight concerning the Qantas story.
That Qantas story. Backstory, The Chairman's Lounge is a new book that has been written by Joe Aston. He is a former Liberal Party staffer, but also Australian Financial Review columnist, well known for his ripping tales about Qantas, and now there's a book and other things, right? So that's the backstory. One of the revelations, there are plenty more, can I say, but one of them was that the Prime Minister asked for 22 flight upgrades. The Prime Minister has put this, well, to rest, let's see if it works, but has said that he did not ask Alan Joyce through any sort of means, including text or email or through intermediaries or through phone calls, for upgrades. That's the Prime Minister's statement. Ben Fordham, who's a radio presenter, has read an exchange between him and the Prime Minister that makes it definitive. But the rest of us, including me, have spoken to the Prime Minister's office, and they too have said this did not happen. Now, this doesn't make the story end. I'll tell you why. Not because of the Prime Minister per se, but I think it's it's a broader story, and it's opened a can of worms for generally all politicians and their relationship with big companies, including Qantas. Bridget McKenzie is the kind of chief questioner on all of this. She's the shadow transport person in the coalition. Now she's auditing herself over claims she made that she hadn't received upgrades. Now she's looking at her own records after questions are raised. The Australian Financial Review reporting on that today. That to me just demonstrates that this is a bigger story than just the Prime Minister. Now he says he didn't do this. We'll hear what Joe Aston has to say because he made the original revelations. We haven't yet heard from Alan Joyce, but that's the Prime Minister's claim. But the big question that I think will now keep coming up is the broader ramifications here.
Thanks, PK.
Thanks.
Miners are calling for reforms to speed up the approvals process for critical minerals projects. 2 projects in New South Wales were both knocked back recently, the Bowden's silver mine and McPhillamys gold mine. The industry says it's shaken investor confidence and put new projects in doubt. David Cornish has spoken to key players at the International Mining and Resources Conference in Sydney about the balance of supporting industry on one hand and protecting the natural environment on the other. And he is conveniently here in the studio with us now. Hi, David.
Hi, Ruby.
How long do mining approvals typically take?
Well, it's a bit hard to know exactly because we haven't got all the data yet, but I spoke to Nick Hall, who's from an engineering company, Worley, a massive company, works in 50 countries, 50,000 employees, and he said to get a copper project up globally, it takes about 17 years from when you dig the first hole to prove up the resource until you actually get some copper produced. And we also spoke to Rowena Smith. She's from Australian Strategic Minerals. They've got a project in Dubbo to produce rare earth, and they've managed to get a processing plant up in Korea. It's already producing the end product, but it took them 20 years to get their mining approval here in Australia, and they're 4 years away from getting the finance and then producing their first product. So it can take a really long time.
And how sure are they of getting approval? I mean, how many of these projects are rejected?
Well, actually, in New South Wales, there's a pretty good strike record. So the Minerals Council said yesterday at this huge mining conference in Sydney that in the last 10 years they've had 48 project proposals and 40 of them got up. Right? The 3 that were rejected were greenfields things, so it's pretty hard to get a new mine up, and 3 were coal extensions. And 6 are critical minerals projects. So that's where the pipeline's shifted now away from coal and into critical minerals. And so when, that's the bit that we need, that the mining industry says we need to speed up.
And why does this matter? Why are these conversations happening now?
Well, we're trying to, the latest climate figures are out, it's not looking good, and mining is part of that group of, heavy industry in Australia that produces a lot of emissions, and if they can't reduce those emissions by the 2030 and the 2050 deadlines, then we're facing a much warmer climate, and that's a real problem. But the industry is saying that we actually we could develop the technological solutions, but we're 10 years behind the game. And we're really going to have to find some new ways of working in order to get these critical minerals out of the ground. And that's going to take a massive effort. And we need those things for wind towers, solar panels, whatever new technology we're going to need to produce clean energy.
Yeah, so is clean energy the solution?
Well, there's a few solutions. There are some great technical solutions. Like, it's fascinating to go and look at the tech stuff that's happening down at that conference. And the mining industry is talking about the need to collaborate a lot more. So rather than compete with each other, actually work together. So, you take that bit, we'll take that bit, and together they could produce solutions faster. They are worried about some government decisions to cancel projects, like the McPhillamys mine, for example, happened right at the end. Like, that mine was approved. And then on a cultural heritage basis, the federal government intervened. That rattles the cage for investors, and it gets hard to raise the money. But the federal government is doing some really good things on that front, the miners say, helping them with equity and debt funding. They've, in New South Wales, they've given some royalties relief up front, so when it's hard to finance a project in the early stages, they can have some relief that way. And in WA, the big mining state, they've decided to start a parallel process. So when you dig that first hole in the ground to test a core sample, you can start a mine approval process. So it's a bit speculative, right? But if you could get a water licence and a mining approval process, a licence, in that sort of 10-year time it takes to prove up the resource with exploration, you could shave off several years from that process time.
Expedite the process. Yeah. Really interesting conversation. Thank you, David Cornish.
Thank you.
Well, love it or loathe it, Halloween is here to stay. More than 1 in 5 Australians are expected to get involved this year. Reporter Sophie Holder joins us now from Adelaide. Sophie, what is behind the rise in the popularity of Halloween here?
Good morning, Ruby. Well, some experts say it's because of social media and also the influences of Hollywood too. And like you say there, I think whether you're a lover of Halloween or you're a Halloween hater, it really is here to stay, with people really getting into the spooky season, like this incredible house behind us. Now, statistics do show that around 1 in 5 Australians will be getting involved in celebrations, and we're set to spend around $450 million as well on things like costumes, decorations, and the most important bit, those sweet treats as well. Now, the Australian Retailers Association does say, though, that we are a bit down on spending this year as people are still facing that cost of living crunch. But they do say that there's other options. People can look to social media for DIYs or some of those budget costumes. Now, it might be growing in popularity here in Australia, though, but there are certainly some people who think that Halloween is a bit too American to be here, or maybe it's a bit of a consumerism-driven thing to spend that money. We spoke to some people this morning, and here's what they had to say.
As people see more American culture celebrating it, kids get really, really into it as well, the costumes, and the more stores here get into it as well, I think it really, really spreads.
And some people might say Halloween's, really American, doesn't have a place here, it's a bit commercial. What do you have to say about that?
I just think it's a lot of fun. I think it's great to get dressed up and express ourselves.
And some people say that Halloween's really American, it doesn't have a spot here, it's all about spending money on things. What do you guys reckon about that?
No, not at all. It is here.
It's like a celebration, so we should do it. Doesn't matter what festival is it, but we should just go and celebrate how are we gonna celebrate it, because we are earning for that. We are just doing work for that. We're gonna spend how we like it.
So whether you're a Halloween lover or a Halloween hater, it does seem pretty clear it's here to stay, and I hope everyone at home has more treats than tricks tonight.
I'm personally a big fan of spooky season. Sophie Holder, thank you. Argentinian scientists have discovered the world's oldest tadpole, which lived alongside dinosaurs in the Middle Jurassic period some 161 million years ago. The excellent state of the fossil in Argentina's southern Patagonia region suggests that many features of today's tadpoles have remained stable for millions of years. The discovery has been described as a key paleontological find and will help us understand the evolution of frogs and toads. Let's go to sport now with Arianna Levy. Ari, good news for the Aussies at the Paris Masters this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Ruby. It certainly is good news. Now, Australia's Alex de Minaur has booked his spot in the last 16 of the Paris Masters after winning in straight sets against Serbian Mijomir Kecmanovic. Now, the world number 9 won the match 6-4, 7-6 to all but lock in his chance at securing a coveted spot in the ATP finals for next month. The other Aussies in action knocked off 2 big fish in the tournament as well, with Jordan Thompson taking out Norwegian star Casper Ruud, as well as young gun Alexei Popyrin beating world number 4 Daniel Medvedev in 3 sets. Now, the final of the Paris Masters is scheduled for November 3rd, and it's expected to be held at Accor Arena, also in Paris.
And Ari, some positive news for the Diamonds from the netball's Constellation Cup.
Yeah, definitely. It's all thanks to that relentless defensive performance. We saw the Diamonds gain that 13-goal victory over New Zealand last night. Now, the signs had looked a bit ominous for the Australian team as New Zealand raced for an early 4-goal lead, but the Diamonds quickly fall back to secure that win. The 63 goals to 50 victory in Melbourne certainly ends a disappointing series for the Diamonds on a more positive note. Now, the Silver Ferns for New Zealand have claimed the series, and that's officially concluded the international netball tournament for this season.
And the Brisbane Heat have maintained impressive form in the Women's Big Bash.
Yeah, they certainly have, and it's been described as sort of this history-making win, beating the Melbourne Renegades by 28 runs in Brisbane last night. Now, the Heat posted a handy 8 for 169 from their 20 overs. That was spearheaded by Georgia Redmayne's 44 runs off 39 bowls. The Renegades came out swinging early in their innings, posting 0 for 51 runs before emerging star Grace Parsons tore the order completely apart, taking 2 wickets in 4 bowls in the 6th over. Now, the Heat move 2-0 for the season before their next match, which is against Hobart on Saturday.
And finally, Ari, a landmark deal for the AFL's next season.
Yeah, this is extremely exciting news for WA footy fans. Now, North Melbourne are set to host 2 of their home game matches from West Australia for the next 3 seasons as part of this deal. The deal will see the Roos play 2 matches in WA against the Eagles as well as the Dockers, with 1 match in Perth and the other tip to be in the country town of Bunbury at the newly refurbished Hands Oval. Now, it is believed that the AFL will pay the club $2 million a year for the deal, whilst also alleviating fixture stresses on Fremantle as well as West Coast. But it is certainly good news for many of those West Coast fans on the other side, especially with the footy season just on the horizon.
Arianna, thank you. Time to check the weather now with Nate Byrne.
Hey Ruby, keeping an eye on the satellite pictures. A little bit difficult right now because it is a mess. We've had isolated showers and storms picking up through large parts of the country, particularly the west. But you can see a signal here. There's a frontal system going through and a prefrontal trough ahead of it. That's going to be a bit of a feature for the day in the east because we're going to see some wet and potentially stormy weather too. Heat is the other thing we're really watching. Heat's been pooling in the northwest of the country, and in fact heat wave conditions continue there. In the coming days, we're going to see that creeping eastwards. More on that in a second. Let's start though with the heat that's causing some fire danger today. High fire danger conditions on both sides of the country, including down through into large parts of South Australia. That's largely because of some winds combining with those warm temperatures. Now, we've got lots of storm action on the way today in the north and also in parts of the east, with a potential for severe thunderstorms, particularly for southeastern Queensland and for the country around the Gulf of Carpentaria's south too. No warnings at this stage, but we'll stay across it. It's going to be a relatively active day through those areas, particularly up in the tropics. We've got wet weather right along the east coast of New South Wales through the day today. Through the outlook, we'll be talking about more fronts, not so much about rain though. We've got a couple coming through the next week or so, and what it's going to do, not really deliver much in terms of totals, but it's going to grab hold of that heat in the north and drag it into the southeast. I mean, look at how much rainfall we're expecting. The tropics definitely getting the best of the falls through the week ahead, but you can see those signals picking up just a little bit with those fronts coming through, but no significant rainfall to add to the gauges. Instead, let's take a look at that heat. It's been lingering in the northwest of WA for a long time. You can see here it being pulled into the south. The southeast gets a pretty warm end to the weekend before some slightly cooler air comes in, but as we get into next week, we are going to be talking about a lot of heat through the interior, central, south and central parts of the nation, and also through the inland of Queensland. We could see temperatures getting to 40s, and it's likely to stick around. So low intensity heat waves are going to be a feature of the week ahead. For now, let's get into Queensland, where, look, for the most part, you've got clear skies, but we're keeping an eye on this wet and stormy weather. Firstly, in the north, mostly around the Gulf country. We could see severe cells there later today, and then for central and southeastern districts. Now, the most of the risk of severe thunderstorms is around the border ranges in southern Queensland there, but they could move further afield. Brisbane's looking at a possible shower. We're not ruling out lightning for the city. It's getting to 31 degrees today. And then that stormy weather extends into the northern and central inland of New South Wales. And it tends more to showers in the east, particularly along the central and southern coast. But you'll see some lightning picking up here and there, like Wollongong could see some. For Sydney, showers developing, could be 10 millimetres in the gauges. 25 will be the top for you. And in Canberra, where you've got a dry day. Further south, Victoria dealing with some isolated showers in the south. There is a chance of storms for the far eastern ranges. That'll happen this afternoon. Warm in the north. For Melbourne, it's getting to 19, just a shower or two. In Tassie, wet weather is spreading right across the state this morning. Now, it will ease back. Just sticking around in the west, the far south and the northeast as we get towards this evening, just as the snow level drops down to 900 metres. Hobart, showers for you will ease later. It's getting to 15 today. Meanwhile, in South Australia, a couple of falls around the southern coasts. Now, they'll spread to areas around the northern agricultural area through this morning, southern parts of the northeast pastoral as well. You might get a couple of storms in the far northwest. Adelaide staying mostly sunny, though. It's getting to 25. See those gusty winds helping to pick up the fire danger. Over in the west, we've got some coastal showers in the south this morning. They're clearing pretty quickly. Storms for the southern interior too. Otherwise, it's a fine one. Warming up in Perth, getting to 33 today. And then up north, we've got storms around the north-central Kimberley and north of about Tennant Creek in the Territory, Ruby, which means Darwin will get relief from its 33 with a couple of showers, maybe a storm.
Thank you, Nate. And that's ABC News for now. There's more on the ABC News app and, as always, on ABC iView 2. I'm Ruby Cornish. Thanks for your company.